Well, hello and welcome to Dementia Unplugged. I'm Jeannine Forrest, and I am so glad that you're able to join this time to learn about how to make meal times more pleasurable. Before I start the more formal talk, we're going to hear a word from our president of the Dementia Society of America, Kevin Jamieson, and he'll give us a message.
All content, including any potential medical information, is provided as an informational resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment process. It should not be used as a substitute for professional diagnosis, care, and treatment. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or for guidance about a specific medical condition. The opinions expressed and the content shared by Dr. Forrest are not necessarily the opinions and content of the Dementia Society of America. Thank you.
Again, welcome to this webcast where we'll be talking about how to make dining more pleasurable. And I'd like to start off making sure that we are sort of speaking the same common language when we talk about dementia. Dementia is really an umbrella term. It is representative of all the different subtypes of diseases or conditions that can change brain functioning and impact daily life. And there are close to 100 different reasons why someone may develop a dementia. And the most common are Alzheimer's, Lewy body, vascular, frontotemporal disease. But regardless, when we talk about dining and pleasurable dining, the concepts that I'll speak about really are applicable to all different types of dementias. So I just wanted to kind of start with that piece of information. I love this quote by Virginia Woolf. One cannot think well, love well, sleep well if one has not dined well. And that's so true for all of us, and especially people with whatever type of dementia they may have. When you think about food, it's more than just sort of meeting basic nutritional requirements, is it not? When we talk about dining, think about what that means. It's more than just the eating of food, but it's the entire experience. Who's joining us? What is the conversation like? What's the ambiance? The type of food, is it something I enjoy? What about the presentation? All of those elements are things that we should consider when we talk about pleasurable dining for people with dementia, from early stages all the way through late. And we'll talk a little bit on how final stages will be a little bit different. But when we talk about pleasurable dining, I guess I want you to look at the bigger picture here. It's more than just making sure that people have the adequate amount of calories and that they're well hydrated. So one cannot think well, love well, sleep well if one has not dined well. Thank you, Virginia Woolf. So underneath all of this is the fact that there are changes within the brain when we're talking about people with various types and stages of dementia. There's changes in cognitive functioning and motor functioning that really reflect our need to adapt how we either prepare food or communicate during the process, or ways in which we can assist individuals so that it can be much more pleasurable and pleasant throughout the entire experience. There's this concept of having the person come before the task. So the person first and the task second. But I want to have you understand what's important to know about what's changing in the brain and what we need to be aware of when we're making these modifications. So let's look at what changes in the brain are occurring during the eating or dining experience over time. Now, this talk could go on sort of for hours, but I'm going to highlight sort of the more common ones. So in general, especially if someone has the dementia of Alzheimer's type, there can be a shorter working memory. And people may actually forget that they had a breakfast a couple hours ago. So we have to keep that into consideration. That routine is particularly important, and scheduling is important. There's difficulty staying focused. People can be more easily distracted during mealtime. And so the environment plays a role, as well as table settings. And I'm going to go into more detail about each one, but I wanted to kind of put this all on one slide. Individuals can be more easily stimulated. And so, again, we have to look at the type of conversation, who's in the room, the amount of stuff and clutter or things on the table can actually cause some anxiety and distress and make it more difficult for people to stay focused during meal times. There can be difficulty recognizing cues for hunger and thirst, and that places individuals with the dementia more at risk for malnutrition and dehydration. So how do we help to support and remind individuals that it's time to eat and drink? Sensory changes. There are actual changes in the taste buds, and they become sort of less sensitive. And along with this, we're learning that there are also insulin changes in the brain, drops in those levels, which may produce cravings for sweet foods. So it's not uncommon for individuals with their dementias to really crave something soft and sweet. Visual changes are another area that we have to be aware of visual perceptual changes. The visual field actually narrows. So that means that peripheral vision narrows, and the person with a dementia really can only, towards the later stages, focus on what's directly in front of them, kind of like in a cone shape that's narrowed. So if you have a lot of different types of trays or bowls or side dishes, it's going to behoove us to move those just one at a time towards the middle, so we're sure that they can actually see what's offered. The other thing we'll talk about are changes with object recognition. So, for example, a spoon or a knife or a fork, the ability to recognize what that object is for may dissipate over time. An example I have is my mother had vascular dementia. And during breakfast time, I found that she could only eat, basically it was her cereal when she was able to use a spoon. If I put eggs or something like that in front of her, she didn't eat at all. And it took a while for me to realize that she no longer knew how to use a fork or a knife. And so we had to make adjustments with that. But if someone doesn't realize how to use a particular utensil, they may not eat for that reason alone. Changes in hand-eye coordination, the ability to actually move the hand to the lips in a straight forward fashion. Some people, particularly with a Lewy body dementia, may have a Parkinsonian kind of characteristic where they have resting tremors or an intentional tremor. So as they move the hand to the mouth, you may get a lot more shaking, and the food doesn't stay on the particularly spoon. And lastly, we should know that over time, because the brain does control all of our functions, motor functions, and that does include the ability to swallow and chew. So it is in the final stages when one loses that ability, that mechanism to swallow, we really know we're moving towards end of life, and we have to make adjustments for that when we talk about eating and pleasure. So my thoughts here going forward is that I am going to share sort of helpful hints of what I use in my own practice, what I have used with family members who've had various types of dementias, and how I coach families. And this is also supported by research. So as people change in their ability to really eat more pleasurably, it behooves the care provider, whoever you are, whether you're a family care partner, provider, professional person, to really encourage and make this experience as positive as possible. We're really focusing on ability-based care, not so much on what people are losing, but what still remains. So how do we support those changes? As an aside, but still really important, is the fact that it's important to maintain good oral hygiene and dental care from early through late stage. If somebody has gum disease or a cavity and has pain, that can certainly cause problems in just being able to chew, even wanting to eat. So it's something, it's an area that can be easily overlooked, but I'm going to encourage you to make sure that your loved one or patient or resident, make sure that they receive routine examinations and they have daily oral care. I can't stress that enough in its link to pleasurable eating and dining. All right, so now I'm going to start out with some other helpful hints for you to consider. I talked a little bit about creating a schedule, a routine schedule with a pleasant atmosphere. Knowing when dinners or breakfast, lunch, and dinner generally take place really helps to alleviate some anxiety. If people are wondering, frequently asking, is it time to eat? Writing down times on a whiteboard may be appropriate. Overall, you want to allow more time. This is not a time to think we're going to rush someone with a dementia through this experience. And if we are, it's certainly not going to be pleasurable for anyone. So give yourself a half hour more than you would expect. People may be certainly able and interested in helping to prepare meals. We talk about meaningful activities, but individuals with dementia certainly want to feel useful and meaningful. And if this was their common practice, have someone help out in any way they can that's appropriate. So whether that be mixing something, setting the table, you name it, it's part of the experience. How you as the care partner interacts plays a significant role. So look at how what's your energy? Are you smiling? Are you thanking people for helping you? Is it pleasant to be around you, or are you grumpy and frustrated and rushed? That will set the tone and the person's energy and willingness to spend time and to eat. So it's a good gut check for care providers. I also encourage you to keep the atmosphere quiet. I strongly advise turning off background television programs. Most older adults never ate with a television in the background. This can be incredibly distracting, hearing voices in the background and noises. And so what you need to keep in mind is to really allow the environment to help the person focus calmly on the food and the task at hand, which means to eat and to enjoy. But if we're hearing, morning programs and news programs, that can be unsettling. So turn off the television. You may want to put on just some quiet background music that's enjoyable for the person with the dementia, and that's about it. Set the table just prior to eating, because having the plates and the forks and the knives out in advance can be a visual cue. And if they're not planning to eat for another hour or two and you've set the table setting way in advance, it can be confusing, especially when we talk about the importance and the necessity for scheduling and routine. So really just put out the table setting just before you're ready to eat as a cue, as a visual reminder. Use mealtime as an opportunity for connection. So this is an opportunity to spend time to talk, perhaps just, in small, a little bit of small, meaningful talk, but knowing that you're together. Your presence speaks more than the words that you have to say. And this should be a meaningful, relaxing time for both of you. Table settings. Research has shown that if the plate or the bowl is a different color, other than what the food content is, it really helps when there are visual perceptual changes. So if you have mashed potatoes on a white plate, that can be difficult to visualize as the dementia progresses. And so if you have different colored bowls and plates, we have found that people eat more quantity. If there are multiple people around the table, I've found that if you have place settings underneath the table, the plates and spoons, and that really helps to define sort of that person's individual space. And you'll have a little less distraction where one might just pull the food off of the next person's plate. So if you use table mats, place mats, that seems to help in defining space. The other part is, especially if we're noticing that people become easily distracted, put one plate or serving at a time. So if there's an appetizer, just put that one plate first and allow time for the person to eat their salad or soup first, instead of putting it all on the table sort of family style. That can be overstimulating, and then the person ends up not eating much of anything. Centerpieces. You want to make the table as homey and as comfortable as possible, but there was a time, at least when I was growing up, where we used to have this plastic or sort of wax fruit on the table as a centerpiece. That may be deceiving for people with a dementia, and they may try to eat that non-edible centerpiece. So pay attention to what's in front. It still may be appropriate to put flowers, a little center, flower vase. Watch how much you, in terms of salt and pepper, and those kinds of packages, and creamers, how much is available for people who may have what we call a hyperorality, where there's sort of constant cravings, and the individual may be going through all the different packets before we get to the main meal. So be aware that center pieces play a role. Seating. This is an opportunity to, especially if someone is within a wheelchair, to hopefully transfer them to another seat cushion. You really don't want the person to be sitting in the same chair all day, all afternoon, all night long. Not, just to change position, get different pressure relief, and to change up the atmosphere. So whenever possible, change the seating that's appropriate and safe. Throughout the entire experience, it's really important to maintain independence and dignity throughout. So instead of saying, what do you want for breakfast? That question is too broad. Instead, give two options. Do you want cereal or scrambled eggs? And if necessary, show pictures of both. This allows the person to still feel like they have choice, and that allows for just a better sense of independence and dignity. Here's another one. If someone does need to have a piece of material over their clothing, to, if they're prone to sort of dribbling or shaking, please, please, please do not call it a bib. These are adults, not infants. And so use words like napkins. Would you like a napkin? Give people a choice. In a lot of long-term care, we've kind of used the word clothing protector. That might seem a bit odd for people who may not understand what that means, but people understand what napkins mean. And so please don't use the word bib. Don't quiz people during this time. So what I mean by that is, oh, what'd you have, if let's say it's dinner time, what'd you have for breakfast? What'd you have for lunch? Their short-term memory can be diminished, and so it can cause stress if you're quizzing for right or wrong answers. This is really an opportunity to focus your conversation on the current experience, being in the moment. Tell me, what do you taste, in this casserole? Wow, maybe let's say we're having Thanksgiving, and please share a favorite memory of growing up and eating a turkey, a turkey dinner. So focus on what, not right or wrong, but the experience and the flavors, and how do you like the texture of this? Cueing versus doing. Certainly as we move along the trajectory of dementia, it becomes even a little slower for the person to eat. And it could be that the care provider wants to just hurry this up and really sort of, get this meal done. If at all possible, please allow for time and allow the person to do as much as possible. So you may cue, let's try another bite. Or here's some coffee. Let's try another sip. Look at how delicious that whipped cream pie is. Let's, how about if you take another taste? So cueing may be verbal, or it may be where you prompt someone and give them a little bit of either hand over hand, where you help them guide the spoon or fork. I talked earlier about object recognition. when one no longer is able to know how to use a particular utensil, it could be queuing is an order, or we may have to just simplify. And it could be that the person will just use finger foods, and that's okay too. So look really if they have an ability, or you may need to start cutting up someone's food and just have that just available and ready to go, so that all they have to do is spoon it or use a fork. Over time, I've had a lot of success in using adaptive equipment. If someone has difficulty keeping food on the plate, we have rim plates, bowls, weighted spoons and knives, especially if there's any tremor involved, and that helps to alleviate some of those tremors and have a steadying of the food on the utensil. And also two-handled cups with a spout. It has been really effective in clients that I work with where spilling can be a problem. So the idea is you don't want to take over and say, you know, here, let me just give you this drink, if they could do it on their own with adaptive equipment. So we're going to talk about reducing the risk for dehydration and malnutrition. And the ways we get around that are just frequent reminders. When all possible, allow for just the aroma of just pleasant aromas. Imagine how your appetite can be stimulated with homemade baked chocolate chip cookies. I'm getting hungry already. Or, you know, homemade bread. Anytime you can stimulate through various aromas, the better. As people move to late stages, in the American Dietetic Association, other groups have certainly encouraged what we call liberalized diet, meaning, you know, it's no longer a time to really pay strict attention to that low cholesterol, low sodium diet, which can honestly not taste very good, which often is the reason why people don't want to eat much of it in the first place. So if we liberalize, excuse me, meaning eat whatever they want, and so the calories will come, that is often a much more pleasurable experience. And that also helps to decrease reliance on dietary supplements, you know, like Ensure Boost. Those can cause problems in itself. It can cause sort of bloating, diarrhea. And the more you can eat real food, the better. All right, a few more thoughts. Over time, because of the changes in the ability to chew and swallow, people move from what we call a regular to more of a soft diet, and then ultimately pureed. So over time, there's changes. So I have a steak dinner that may be appropriate in the early middle stages, but as we move on, something like meatloaf, which is softer, easier to cut, easier to manipulate, is much more appropriate. And sort of lastly, as we move towards pureed, I can't stress enough how important presentation still plays a role. For those of you who are just listening, on the screen I have a plate of pureed foods, and sometimes they're hard to decipher what they are. It just looks like sort of a blob of something white, brown, green, and orange. If you use molds, piping, to actually help to replicate the shape of the food, you'll find that people who are eating pureed foods will often eat them with much more gusto and eat more of it. I actually walked into a place once that the facility, the care organization was serving pureed catfish. I still can't believe it. It was this bowl of silvery gray, and they were wondering why the person was losing weight and not wanting to eat. So presentation is important for all of us. And then as we move into the real final stages, because that the brain controls our ability to swallow. All of those mechanisms are incredibly intricate. So a normal swallowing process allows for the epiglottis to cover the trach, and so the food doesn't go into the lungs, and all of the food and liquid goes into the stomach. When that stops taking place, and that is sort of a normal expectation in the final stages of dementia, there's more of a chance to what we call aspirate or choke, and the food and fluid goes into the lungs, which causes pneumonia. We know now that when that is happening in the final stages, not early on, but in the final stages, we know that end of life is within the picture. So this is when we sort of change our concept of what pleasurable dining means. The whole idea of tube feedings, gastric feedings, can often be brought into question, but all of the research has shown that it doesn't really improve quality of remaining life, length of life, and there's often a lot more problems for people in the final stages of dementia who end up on G-tube or enteral feedings. So we show love in a different way, and you can certainly talk to your healthcare providers about that, but it's an important concept to be aware of. So at the end of life, we can still have pleasure, but they're called pleasure feedings at end of life. And so it just may be a taste of chocolate or a taste, half a fourth a teaspoon, making sure that good oral care is still in place. And so just a concept I want you to be aware of. But what's really, encouraging to me is that pleasurable, dining and tasting can still take place and still show love and connection from early stage through end of life. So all of these show is that we are learning to care before finding the cure. And in my mind, it'll have to be cures given all the different types of dementias. So learning to care, learning how to provide more pleasurable dining experiences before we find that cure. And that's why you're here. If any of you would like additional one-to-one consultation, please do not hesitate to contact me. The name of my private practice is Through the Forest. That's Through the Forest, forest with 2 R's.com. And my number is 773-704-1834 for a private consultation. I want to thank the Dementia Society of America for their support of this program. And please, it's chock full of caregiver information. Please consider donating to the Dementia Society of America. It's an all-volunteer organization that does amazing, amazing work. And now I'm going to be ending the recording part and opening it up to questions on the chat line. So please bubble up your questions, send them to me, and I am going to end the recording now.